Well, having been formed in Florence and spent so much time, my first love was old masterwork. So I worked on many pieces of the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th century. That is probably the strongest period there, and so the period that you tend to see most frequently. And working on pieces, mid 14th century pieces, gold background panels, was very exciting. Antonio del Pollaiolo, lots of Renaissance masters, and those were really important formative moments for me, just to be in contact with such very complex issues and historical nature of a piece, and learning that conservation was really in service of preserving a work for the future in its entirety. It's one of our important ethical points in art conservation to try to work with the document as it is and optimize the legibility of the work. And one might think of that as a very objective sort of endeavor, but in reality it's quite subjective. We all know that over time artists have been considered well or less considered. They've been over-restored in certain periods and neglected in others. And we know that changes in taste and changes in knowledge have also greatly influenced how people conserved artwork. So the idea of recapturing an artist's intent is a very delicate issue. On one hand, we want to work to conserve the piece as we know the work to be in the body of the rest of the artist's works, but being careful to not impose our own ideas or our own knowledge of that artist on this piece. It's very dangerous to try to restore a piece to how it was originally, because no work is the way that it was when it was actually done in the first place. I was always very interested in public art, and naturally one of the most important sort of art movements here in Oregon is WPA works. They're located in schools, post offices, and of course the Capitol, lots of public spaces. And I became very interested in those just because of their public access, the idea behind them. And over the years I've worked on several series of murals in high schools and whatnot. So I guess it was my background in WPA work and my activity in this area in WPA era murals that brought me to this project originally. The fire occurred August 31st, I believe, but I wasn't able to see the work until, I believe, October or so. So a lot of the cleanup had already taken place, but the wreckage of the panels, a lot of it was still inside the suite. So the fire damage was very evident along the ceilings. It was clear exactly where the heat had been concentrated. The painting was in its original location, surrounded by the paneling still, though damaged. At that point, it was covered with a layer of soot. We know that the fire was fed by asphalt, rolled asphalt tiles. And so the soot that was covering and the grime that was covering the work was a very dark black, brownish black. And so the whole surface was very darkened because of that substance that had deposited on the surface. The work is painted in oil on canvas, and then the canvas was adhered to a plaster section of the wall that was designated during the construction process. And that type of adhering of a painting or a drawing onto another surface is called maroflage, and it was one of the most common WPA type of construct, so that the artist could actually formulate and execute the painting in their studio and then come on site afterwards and install it. So mariflaged paintings adhered onto wall are very, very common for WPA era pieces. The artist, Barry Faulkner, that worked on the Rotunda paintings was the same that worked on the map. So he followed WPA guidelines and used a lead white paste to adhere it, which hardens quite a bit. So it's practically irreversible. Very, very intense cement. Architects, preservation architects, and woodworkers, everybody's kind of working holistically to recreate every aspect of the room. And my part of that involved working with them to determine how I would deinstall the work, and then later how it would be reinstalled. So one of the biggest initial problems was just how to remove it from the wall without damaging the plaster, the painting, or the construct. So I went down with a crew of people in January, and we were able to remove it carefully by severing all of the nails that were holding the framing onto the wall. Because of how strong the adhesion was, we actually removed the entire plaster section, and it had been framed with some vertical and horizontal wood framing. Onto that framing they had tacked some metal lath, and then they had plastered on top of the metal lath and created this very smooth skim-coated plaster surface that was just empty white before the artist adhered the canvas onto it. Once we were able to put it up here, we did a very close examination of the work, clearly facilitated by how close I could get to every aspect of the surface. Testing then ensued, and we determined what the solubility parameters for the removal of the surface grime was, and the first thing we did was remove that surface grime. This especially because we know that creosote-based or asphalt-based materials are non-siccative, so they remain soft, and we were afraid that it might etch into the paint layer. So we were very concerned to remove that as soon as possible, and that was our first step. After that, we were able to pass on to sort of structural repair, try to re-adhere some of the very raised blistering that had occurred, and that was done with the use of adhesives, humidity, applied heat locally, and pressure, so that we were able to perfectly flatten and smooth all of those blisters. In particular, the corner, the upper right-hand corner, was raised 3/4 of an inch. So there was considerable delamination of the canvas from the substrate plaster that had to be smoothed out. And once we did that, it was a matter of filling the losses and in painting, and we're right now in the process of concluding that last part of the process. There's very little archival information, so all the information that I'm accumulating now through my testing and observation will be compiled into a treatment report, and that will be kept on file in the archives of the Capitol for a conservator in the future. But unfortunately, there was very little in the archives about that. unless it's in a museum setting or, there's been previous treatment. Unfortunately, WPA era works sort of went through a period of critical neglect, and so a lot of people just threw them away, painted over them. So only now, so many pieces that are in public areas are sort of being re-evaluated and looked at again. So unfortunately, no, there's sometimes lost trails of murals that have been either removed because of construction or just painted over because of change in taste. So it's quite common, yes. I'd say the biggest challenge was to smooth the blistered canvas and paint layer, since it was really extremely delaminated, as I said, up to 3/4 of an inch in some areas. There was great concern on my part that underneath those blistered areas there might be fragmented lead paint underneath that wouldn't allow me to smooth it out completely, but we were fortunate enough to find that underneath there was no debris or anything that would have prevented us from smoothing it. So that was probably the most difficult aspect. It's a very heavy piece, so naturally all the precautions have to be made to be able to lift it with safely and precisely into its perfect location. It has to be coordinated with the people that are doing the panel work because it's sort of precisely framed by the panel work. So that'll be the most important thing, for it to be registered perfectly in the right location. The frame will be removable. They've redesigned the paneling and framing so that it will be removable. Before, it had all been nailed in on top of the painting, so it wasn't reversible. In our case, we'll be designing a new mounting system so that bolts can be removed. The piece could be removed for any eventual necessity, and the frame is separate from the rest of the paneling, so it also is easily removable. I would say the unique thing about working on this project involved how how sort of organically every aspect of the room was being treated, and that thanks to historic architects such as Peter Major that's working on the project. They've gone and rediscovered the original flooring, the paneling. They're going to sort of try to bring the room back to how it was originally in 1937-38 as it was conceived. Naturally respecting changes and modifications that have taken place that now are historically part of the room. So it was a very large project, and mine is just a very small part of that. I think that the state of Oregon is exceptionally lucky to have such a fine example of work by Barry Faulkner in our capital. He was a very influential artist and also connected with other important artists on the East Coast. He was from New Hampshire originally, very connected to Abbott Thayer, a good friend of his, and the Sangodens family, and in particular Augustus Sangodens and the Ruggles, all important influential artists in that area. His work may be found in lots of important spaces, such as the National Archives in Washington, D.C., the State House of New Hampshire as well, and a large mosaic that can be found in the Rockefeller Center in New York. So he's sort of a unique figure outside of the local art scene that was brought in to do the state capitol murals, and so it's lovely to work on something that's not found anywhere else in Oregon, very unique. For the United States, the body of WPA work is very unique just because of its very unique origins, and it really represents probably the most important historical body of work found in many Western states especially. It represents not only historical subject matter, but also historical time that I think is very important for everybody and very informative for all Oregonians to learn from, not only just the historical aspects, but the visually beautiful aspects and the aesthetics of each piece. Art conservation is a very big field, of course, and I hope that it's a growing field, but naturally it's not for everybody. It takes a very specific character, and so you have to sort of be cut out for it. That said, I think that the preservation of our historical heritage is something that can be done in so many different ways, and I hope that my field, art conservation, can help people to sort of understand the importance of history in general and how that could apply to so many different areas of our society and our community.